Merge Tactics has just got its first set of balance changes since the first big update, so let's look at all the new buffs and nerfs. Starting with the nerfs, the 4-4 Assassins is getting a slight nerf. The critical chance and the critical damage are both getting decreased by 10%. Now guys, I don't think this will be a huge change because you generally want to run the 2-4 Assassins over the 4-4 Assassins always in the first place because it takes up less space and essentially accomplishes the same thing, so I don't think this change will impact the meta at all. Next up, guys, the coaching modifier is getting a slight nerf. The HP buff is decreasing by 50%, and the damage buff is decreasing by 40%. And the strategy, I think, will remain the same, guys. And just really quickly, if you don't know how the strategy works, what you want to do is you want to have 3 copies of a card in your comp. You want to keep your 2-star on your board so that, of course, the 2-star is strongest, and then your 1-star of that card will be on the bench so it receives the coaching buff. After it receives the coaching buff, you sell your 2-star and then you upgrade the card with the coaching buff to 2-star and you place them back on the board. Now, guys, that strategy will be the same, but you'll just be slightly less rewarded for it. Master Arena modifier is finally getting a nerf, guys. The HP buff is getting decreased by 50% and the damage buff is getting decreased by 40%. And what this does is the biggest problem with Master Arena in the past is that if you got bad RNG and you had to pivot late, then you would get punished for it because you would lose out on the boost. But now, guys, if you have to pivot late due to bad RNG, you won't be punished as heavily and you won't lose as much HP because the enemy troops with the boost will not be able to do as much damage. Last up for the nerfs, guys, the monster drink modifier is also getting a nerf, guys. So interesting, a lot of these new modifiers are getting nerfs. The HP and damage buff are both getting reduced by 50%. And this is actually pretty significant, but in terms of strategy, look, Monster Arena is a pretty simple modifier to play. Just your weakest card gets a buff. And that's really all that's going to change. Your buffed card will just get a bit of a slighter buff. There's no strategy change whatsoever. First up with the buffs, guys, we have the Electro Giant getting a cooldown buff, and this is actually huge. How this works is every time you upgrade the Electro Giant, his cooldown will decrease in terms of seconds. And what this will do is the problem with the Electro Giant is that he would basically never change his cooldown. So it's really hard for him to consistently activate his ability because he would oftentimes die before he'd actually get the ability down. But this actually guarantees that you'll have way more consistency with the ability now because if you upgrade the card more, you'll be getting the abilities off way more consistently. But I don't think this will make him meta or anything. I still think this would make him maybe a bit of an average or a bit above average unit, but I still think he'll be a decent card in this meta, but it won't take over the meta or anything like that. Next up, guys, the Skeleton Dragons are getting a slight HP cost reduction by 40%. This is actually a buff because how this works is every time the Skelly Drag duplicates, it actually loses less HP. And the 2 problems that made the Skeleton Dragons one of the worst cards in Merge Tactics is number 1, it lost too much HP when it duplicates, and number 2, every time it duplicates, its attack animation essentially stops for a few seconds, which basically is really terrible because it would not shoot any cards. And I think this will definitely make the card stronger, maybe sort of an average level card, maybe even slightly below average still, just because of the attack animation stopping is still a huge problem. But I still think it's not going to be a huge strong or a meta card. With the last card buff, we have the Royal Ghost getting a 10% hit speed reduction, and basically what this does is he'll attack slightly faster. I don't think this will make him a super strong meta card or anything. I still think he's going to be around the average mark, and in a lot of cases, if you're running assassins with the GK, you'd still want to run the Goblin instead, in my opinion, so this is not a huge change. For the first trait buff, we have the Electric trait getting a 33% damage increase. So every time it zaps, it'll do 20% damage instead of 15%. I don't think this is a huge buff, to be honest. I still think the Electric trait is kind of mid, but if you guys didn't notice, a day ago, the Electric buff had a huge bug where it would do 50% damage instead of 20%. But the bug has actually been fixed because I'm recording this like a day late. So the Electric trait is still mid in my opinion. The Rangers are also getting a nerf in terms of max stacks. It's getting increased by 6-7%. Now guys, I don't think this is enough to warrant making Rangers like very meta. And by the way, this only applies to the 4-4 Rangers, I believe, because the max stacks for the 4-4 Rangers was 15 and now it's 25. So I don't think it's enough to maybe make the 4-4 Rangers meta because that would make your front line extremely weak and very heavily prone to assassins. But guys, if you haven't noticed, the 2-4 assassins is extremely powerful, or the 2-4 rangers, excuse me, is so powerful. I've personally used it a lot to get to the podium a lot, so I definitely recommend checking out at least the 2-4 rangers. The ace trait is also getting a huge buff, guys. The 2-4 is actually getting a heal for the captain by 40%, which is huge because the 2-4 ace trait was already good. It was very underrated in my opinion if you're running the executioner and the mega knight. then the XE would get the Ace trait and it would do way more damage. But now the Ace will also get a 40% heal, which is huge. In my opinion, this will definitely make the Blasters comp with the XE and Mega Knight way more meta. Also, guys, the 4-4 trait is getting a buff. The bonus damage for the Captain is increasing slightly, and the heal is also increasing by 40%, which is significant. However, I wouldn't say this would make the 4-4 comp meta because you'd still have to use a Bandit, which is like a bottom tier card, and the P.E.K.K.A. was just also kind of mid, so I would still say there are a lot of better comps out there. The Noble is getting a buff for every single tier. The 2 out of 6 is getting a 20% buff, while the 4 to 6 and the 6 out of 6 are both getting 33% buffs. Now, guys, I think this 2 out of 6 buff will definitely help out on the Blasters comp with the Musketeer and the Knight slightly, but I don't think this would make it like hugely meta or anything. Also, for the 4 to 6 Noble, I still don't think you intentionally go for 4 to 6 Noble. But for the 6 out of 6 Noble, I think this would actually make the Noble way more viable in Ultimate Origins or any dummy modifier that provides the Noble buff. So I think you'll definitely see a lot more 6 out of 6 Noble there. For the last buff of this patch notes, you have the Goblin who's getting a buff. Actually, in my opinion, the 2 out of 4 Goblin is basically enabling you to have the chance of getting a Dark Goblin as well. And a lot of people have been saying this could be a nerf because if you have if you have the Stab Goblin and the Spear Goblin in the early game, then you'd get a guaranteed merge. But now there's a slight chance you'll get a Dark Goblin instead. Now, guys, I think this would slightly nerf the early game because if you don't get a guaranteed merge, well, that'll be a bit harder to kind of get that cycle going. But in the long term, I think this is actually a buff because if you're running the Rangers, then you'll be able to consistently max out that Dark Goblin a lot more if you have the 2 out of 4 Goblin buff. And the 4 out of 4 Goblin buff is getting a huge buff. Let me just say huge buff. It's guaranteeing a Dark Goblin or a Machine, which basically makes the Goblin Queen broken because if you're running the Goblin Queen, oftentimes you run the 4 to 4 Goblins. And if you're running the Goblin Queen and the 4 to 4 Goblins, then you're basically already going to get a lot of Goblins from her ability, and you'll be able to get Dark Goblin or Machine guaranteed. So this would make you basically, if you're playing Goblin Queen with 4 to 4 Goblins, you'd be able to max out the Machine or the Dark Goblin pretty much every game if you survive, which is actually going to make the Goblin Queen extremely viable. And I still think the Empress is slightly better, but the Goblin Queen will be almost as good as her now. Those are all of the balance changes for the month of October. Which nerf or buff did you like the most?